So in last week's waiver video, we had guys like Parker Washington and the Seahawks defense that could have single-handedly won you a week in fantasy. So here are the actual legit week-winning players in week 11 you got to pick up off the waiver wire, and not the one-week wonders that people go get and then do nothing, with a list of streamable defenses at the end. So make sure to stick around for that. But I don't waste time in these videos. Here goes the priority list of top guys. First priority, starting with Rashid Shaheed. Yes, he only put up 3.3 fantasy points. It was his first game as a Seahawk. I'll give him a pass there, but more importantly, this is a real case of how advanced statistics really do prove more for fantasy football than just a total point number, and why you need somebody like me that will break all this down for you. So hit that like button and subscribe if you guys are new. But we look at Sam Darnold. He only threw 12 passes last week. You're not going to succeed on that. More importantly, none of these wide receivers ran any routes. Shaheed had 8, Cooper Kupp ran 9, JSN ran 11 routes. When you're only running 11 routes, how many targets can you possibly get? This is literally unheard of. An average route run per game number for wide receivers is anywhere from 20 to 30, and then once you get to the 40s and 50s, that's like the high range. But you put 40 points in the Cardinals and none of these wide receivers ran routes. Shaheed is not a bad player. It was just a weird game script. He is a top guy, just like Alec Pierce, who we talked about him and called this out last week to be a start. We were a week early on that. Now he's coming off back-to-back weeks over 17 fantasy points. That cannot be ignored. JJ McCarthy put up a smooth 16 last week and then 19 the week before that on the Lions in his first week back from injury. Now he gets a top 5 matchup against the Bears defense this week. He is a start, a priority add, just like Joe Flacco if you need a quarterback who, again, gets very positive matchups against the Steelers this week, who are allowing some of the most points and yards to opposing quarterbacks. But he also has the pass volume that is just elite and insane, and the weapons to sustain it. So he's a top guy, just like Trey Benson, who a lot of people for some reason have forgotten about. He is the RB1 when he does come back in a matter of weeks, if not this week coming up now. So him and Tez Johnson are going to be some of our top waiver ads with all the injuries just in the NFL in general, but specifically the Buccaneers wide receivers. Tez Johnson has started to run a ton of routes in this offense, getting a ton of looks and just offensive opportunity and snaps in general. He's a great deep threat. He doesn't need a super high target share to be valuable. Troy Franklin, another top ad. We've talked about him for so long. I don't know how he's only rostered in 55% of leagues. It's insane. He's averaged 9.25 targets per game over the last 4 weeks, more than Courtland Sutton. But our number one priority ad, if he's still out there for you, is going to be a tight end only rostered in 38% of leagues. It should be a 100%. It is Cade Otton for the exact same reasons that we're adding Tez Johnson. I mean, all of these wide receivers are injured. It's him and Emeka Egbuka that are leading the team in first read target share and target share in general. But now that you check your waiver for those guys, here are the tier 2 guys that aren't rostered in as many leagues. We will start here with Tyler Algier. Everybody has been questioning this backfield split right now for the Falcons. I'm going to break it down completely and fully, no BS for you. Bijan has essentially been playing wide receiver for this Falcons team over the past few weeks. I mean, it is insane. He's running an insane amount of routes, but it's also leading the Falcons to have a ton of 2 RB sets. They are running plays with 2 running backs on the field, more than any other team over the past few weeks. That's getting Algier a ton more opportunities and more field time in general to be able to see those, and more rushing attempts. And it's also letting Bijan run more routes and getting more receptions, which is good for both of them. Like, this isn't necessarily bad, but again, it led Tyler Algier to see 11 carries for 57 yards and the 2 touchdowns last week, which is a byproduct of their 2 RB system. And Algier is a good pass catcher too. Like, he can do that. He won't ever be able to get that volume with Bijan Robinson healthy, but this is a worst case scenario. Just floor play. You can stash a good handcuff, possibly the most valuable handcuff in fantasy football right now. So you're checking off multiple boxes by adding him here. And through the home stretch of the season, at this point in the year, you have to be adding the guys like that. And there's also one running back I have at the end of the video that is exactly an example of this that we need to be stashing, only rostered in 17% of leagues. Make sure to stick around to the end for that. But with the amount of injuries this week, you want to go add Dawson Knox. Now, it will be dependent on how serious the injury for Dalton Kincaid is for our urgency rating on this video. But we look at Dalton Kincaid last week. He left early versus the Dolphins with a hamstring issue. Those injuries tend to linger. Like, they're not very easy to get over, again, depending on how serious it is. But it looks like there's a very high chance that he will at least miss this week versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a matchup where the Bills are going to have to pass a ton, generate a ton of offense to just stay competitive with a very good Buccaneers team. So we saw once Dalton Kincaid went out last week, Dawson Knox was the primary tight end in general, just for snaps, but also in routes run. He dominated the pass catching role there. He ran 27 routes, 46 total snaps, compared to the number 2 tight end in Jackson Hawes at 13 routes and nowhere near as many snaps. So we saw in previous seasons before Kincaid was drafted, Dawson Knox was number one, the tight end 8 and the tight end 14 in those 2 seasons as a starting tight end for the Bills. He has had that hidden potential before. He's only 28 years old, so it's not like he's just some afterthought. He's in a good offense and a good tight end. Now he's given that opportunity, and I don't mean to make this a tight end video, but there are some amazing options this week. If you don't have Dalton Schultz, please go out and get him. You can use him as trade bait at the bare minimum because his value is not going down. He's not a 1 week flyer. He's only rostered in 33% of leagues. It's just insane. Since their bye week, he's averaged 8 targets per game. He has been more consistent, really, than Nico Collins. I mean, Nico Collins has also been injured, but he's running the same amount of routes as him, getting a decent amount of opportunities as him. Like, he's right up there with Nico Collins, giving him the opportunity regardless of who the quarterback is. It does not matter. And why that happens, if you look at the game log, you look in week 3, his snaps just all of a sudden jumped up, and we ask ourselves why that happened. The answer is because that's when Cade Stover, their tight end 2, went on IR. He has been increasing and dominating in routes ever since then, doubling in all of his numbers. That will not slow down, especially with how bad this offensive line is. I will go into this because it is important. They allow some of the highest pressure rate per drop back on CJ Stroud. He also has one of the lowest time to pass ratings in the NFL because of how bad the line is, which is terrible for the wide receivers because if you can't let your routes develop downfield, you have no chance to get any kind of targets, but it's great for the tight ends because they chip block, they run the very short routes. They're kind of a safety valve, a safety blanket for these quarterbacks because they can allow the routes to develop. They're not very far downfield. He is a beneficiary of that. This is why he's seeing such a high target share. So him and Cedric Tillman also needs to be added, who didn't have an elite first game back, if we're being completely honest. He's been injured for a very long time, 3.1 fantasy points, but there was some beautiful signs that we did see that makes him a part of this video. To get straight to it, he ran the second most routes on the team at 34. He also had 54 snaps compared to Jerry Jeudy at 70, and both of these numbers are going to go up because we saw Tillman and Jeudy played in over 90% of the 2 wide receiver sets last week, which is great because the Browns run some of the most heavy personnel 2 tight end sets in the NFL. We see Harold Fannin being a fantasy value and Njoku being a fantasy value. They're both on the field a ton because this offensive line needs help blocking, and they're both pretty decent tight ends. So when you have 2 tight ends on the field, that means there's one less wide receiver available to get targets and just on the field in general. So the fact he's already playing in those 2 wide receiver sets is a very big green flag. The second green flag is again that he's a slot wide receiver. And I know we just talked about this before, but the slot wide receivers are more valuable on teams with bad offensive lines because they have a lower average depth of target, so their routes aren't deep downfield. They can run shorter routes. They are an easier target, especially for Dylan Gabriel, who's not a super accurate quarterback. Again, when you're running short routes, you don't have to throw as far. This team is just simply having no wide receiver competition. Again, it's Jamari Thrash, it's Isaiah Bond, who's been injured, and both of them have really never proven to do anything yet in the NFL. So when we have Cedric Tillman, he's a critical part of this offense. In his first 2 healthy games, he totaled 15 targets, 26.2 fantasy points. Now, yes, that stretch was with Joe Flacco at quarterback, who had an insane amount of passing volume, but the target share per dropback was still pretty decent. And Gabriel does have pretty high pass volume too, even if it isn't super efficient. At least the floor is there with that. But when we get into the deep targets, guys, these are players that are rostered in less percentage of leagues that are probably going to be available for 100% of you guys watching this video. But honestly, this might be the most important part too, because these are an early look at the league winners that are coming in the next few weeks. You want to be 1 week early on. We started with Tyler Lockett as the number 1 ad in this section. Honestly, should be added in your league regardless of how big it is. We talked about him before last week. He comes out catching 5 of his 6 total targets for 44 yards, 9.4 fantasy points in his second game coming back and signing to this Raiders team. You see on this chart, he's increasing his snaps. That is only going to continue. He's reuniting number 1 with Geno Smith, also with Pete Carroll. In his prime Seahawks days, like, these are really good signs, giving him a boost already, we can see. But possibly the most important factor here is that he's filling in 1-to-1 with that Jacoby Myers slot role. Here we go again with the slot wide receivers. You guys know I'm a fiend for slot guys, again, because of the target volume. It is true. And we have no real competition. It's Tyler Lockett and nobody. It's Dante Thornton, who really hasn't done much. Jack Besh, who hasn't done much either. They haven't produced. So instantly he comes into this offense as the number 2 option right next to Brock Bowers, who honestly has been pretty unpredictable so far this year. So maybe there's some weeks where he's the wide receiver 1 option. And he gets a beautiful matchup this week against the Cowboys in week 11, who are top 5 in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, yards allowed to opposing offenses, points allowed to opposing offenses. They allow some of the most EPA per play to just general teams. So it doesn't matter that the Raiders aren't that good, or they're going to be in a complete pass funnel mode. Like, they're going to pass a ton. He is valuable, which is why he's on one of the more urgent sides of the ad list because of this matchup. You should also be going through and putting a claim on Luther Burden. For the amount of injuries that DJ Moore has dealt with this year, it is insane. I have him in fantasy football, so I am one to speak on this. He's come out of like 5 games so far this year, all with different injuries. I mean, maybe he'll play next week. Who really knows? I mean, he pops up with a shoulder injury. Maybe he does miss a week, and it's only a matter of time until one of these injuries knocks him out for a few. It probably will be this one. He suffered against the Giants. He did return to play, but again, you never know. With DJ Moore, it looked a little funny, and Burden has been on the edge of breaking out for a while. The severity of DJ Moore's injury will determine how big or urgent of an ad Luther Burden is, but he is that deep threat kind of wide receiver that doesn't need a ton of targets to be fantasy viable. But we did learn a lot from week 11, and what we did learn is that you should be adding Dylan Sampson, who I promise everybody's going to go drop this week. Here's why you shouldn't do that. Sampson has pretty much 100% taking over the third down role from Quinshon Judkins in this offense, insinuating that he is about to get a ton more passing volume and just usage in the receiving game than we think. Now we look at the box score. It looked disgusting. He barely saw any opportunities. He didn't put up really any fantasy points. But this is why you need to follow a page like this, because I show you guys the data that predicts these fantasy values. That's not just points per game. You look at him, 16 routes run next to Quinshon Judkins at 15. He also played 22 snaps to Judkins at 38. By no means am I saying Quinshon Judkins is losing his job. He's definitely the more valuable running back. But this was a Jets game that wasn't insanely out of proportion. It wasn't a crazy blowout. The script effectively didn't change. So you look at him and his trend for Dylan Sampson, if this continues to where he's just playing more and more on third downs and in the passing game, he could be valuable. Now, this is a speculative ad. He probably will never be startable unless Quinshon Judkins gets injured. I wanted to save him for the stash video coming later this week, but you look at the Browns schedule, this guy gets the Ravens this week, the Raiders the next week, the 49ers after that, the Titans after that. That is probably the best 4-week stretch in the entire NFL. And again, if Quinshon Judkins were to get injured at any point in that stretch, he is a league-winning ad. But some of the top defenses we can go through an ad as well. Number 1, clear and away, is going to be the Falcons. One of the best internal units in the NFL just generally. They didn't have a great game last week against a really good Colts offense. I mean, it's Jonathan Taylor. You really can't do anything about it. But they get by far the best matchup against the Panthers this week. I have them projected for over 9 fantasy points, rostered in less than 20% of leagues. Then the number 2 defense this week, we take a clear step down and go to the Vikings, getting one against the Bears. They have been pretty hit or miss as far as the defense goes this year, but so has Caleb Williams. They're an option for you. But if anybody has dropped Kaimi Fairbairn, please go pick him up. He was dealing with injury last week. He's still one of the top kickers in the league. It was not a serious injury. He probably will be back in week 11. If not, you can just stash him on the injury or out list on your league. But again, he gets a matchup against the Tennessee Titans, which is very positive. That's going to finish out this video, though. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one coming tomorrow. All glory to the man above.